Good evening, good morning, wherever it is that you're watching from. Let's start with a bit of an update about what's happening on the front lines today. Starting in Moscow, continued drone attacks in Moscow. Many people are considering this to be a desperate attempt from Ukraine to try to draw Russia into overstepping the mark in some form of retaliation. There was some reporting in the last couple of days, talks that the small drone incursions that have been sent to Moscow, some of those that have hit apartment blocks and office buildings, perhaps may have been to try to reveal Russian air defense around Moscow, and that a large-scale drone attack may be being planned. Yet to see if that will be corroborated, if that will happen. But at this stage, we're still seeing things, small drone attacks happening up here. The map up here, Moscow is way up here. Coming down a little bit, coming down to Belgorod. There has been shelling again in Belgorod. Now, Belgorod is actually in Russia, just over the border, actually in Russia. There has been on and off shelling and minor incursions over the border into Belgorod over the last probably 6 or 8 weeks. With some Ukrainian forces holding a town over there for a period of time. In the shelling that occurred yesterday, there's reports of one person having been killed. Now, moving down into the Kharkiv region, this is the area where things seem to really be heating up in terms of the frontline battle. The reporting coming out of this area is that the Russians are continuing to have success along this front line, roughly along this red line here from Kupyansk down. There are reports now of 53 settlements around this area in the Kharkiv region being evacuated, in the expectation of a further push to the west by the Russian forces. The Defense Ministry spokesman, Lieutenant General Igor Konashenkov, he's reported on Wednesday about Kupyansk that the situation has become critical for Ukraine, and the commander of the Ukrainian ground forces, Genersl Sirsky, has now been appointed to lead the defense of Kupyansk, and he has reportedly visited the city today. So that combined with reports that there are, instead of just the new reserve forces being moved to this area, that some of the forces being moved up there and rapidly deployed to this area are some of Ukraine's better remaining forces. So there is real concern that Russia will soon advance upon Kupyansk, make their way to the Oskol River, and then begin the process of rolling down the river here. So for those of you who are not watching but are just listening, in the Kharkiv region, we have the Oskol River, which rolls down north to south. If or when the Russians make it to the Oskol, they then have a natural barrier on one side of them, and then can break either north or south down the river, picking off settlements as they go. There is reports that there have been Ukrainian forces deserting positions or retreating from positions, failing to follow orders and advance in positions in this area. So it seems as though the Ukrainian line is struggling to contain and to defend this area. Going now to some reporting, which is the Ministry of Defense, the Russian Ministry of Defense reporting. I might just walk through their battle line update for the day. As I've said before, yes, this is Russian Ministry of Defense reporting. However, this is the one consistent source of reporting that we get. Each day they produce a report. Many of the details, many of the advances that they mention do bear out, do appear to be true. and become corroborated. While I can't verify the actual numbers given in terms of the numbers of pieces of equipment destroyed or Ukrainian men lost, there does at least appear to be some level of consistency in their reporting. So even if we look at it as some sort of a guide and perhaps don't focus exactly on the numbers, I think it gives us a feel for the overall activity in the areas of the front line. So the reporting from the Ministry of Defence is that the Zapad group of forces in the Kupyansk direction have been using aviation and artillery and conducting offensive operations on a wide front. As a result of their coordinated actions, 6 attacks and counterattacks by units of the 14th, the 32nd, the 41st and the 67th Mechanized Brigades of the Ukrainian Armed Forces have been repelled close to Novosirsky, which I do have here on the map. So just around here, 6 attacks in this area and counterattacks. Reportedly, they have been repulsed. Additionally, manpower and hardware concentration areas of the 67th Mechanized Brigade and the 103rd Territorial Defence Brigade have been hit close to Sinkovka and Kislovka in the Kharkiv region. The Ministry of Defence reports that the enemy losses, or the Ukrainian losses in this case, were 75 Ukrainian servicemen, 2 armoured fighting vehicles, 3 motor vehicles, a Polish manufactured Crab self-propelled artillery system. These are those large, fat, overgrown looking tanks is what they sort of look like, not with the manoeuvrability or speed of a tank, but effectively an artillery piece mounted on tracks, so that it becomes self-propelled. And also reportedly a US manufactured ANTPQ-50 counter-battery radar station. So these radar stations are used in the artillery duels to track incoming shells and then determine from that, work backwards to determine the location of where those shells were fired from. Apparently, pretty amazing technology. These things can get pretty close, and so you are then able to, once a shell comes your way, detect where it was sent from and aim your return fire on there in an attempt to take out the artillery on the other side. The Krasny Liman region, so moving down here a little bit. Moving down here a little bit. Liman just here. The Center group of forces, supported by their aviation and artillery, they have reportedly repelled 2 attacks by assault groups of the 21st and 42nd Mechanized Brigade of the Ukrainian Armed Forces close to Terny. Terny is just here in this area, so you can see that even my red line now might be getting a little bit old from just a couple of days ago. I need to update that, but it looks as though we might be seeing some sort of Russian forces moving closer to these lines here now. Enemy losses reported were 80 Ukrainian servicemen, 2 armoured fighting vehicles, 3 pickup trucks and 1 D-20 howitzer. As we then move down to the Donetsk region, moving down here. So we were up here at this red line, just moving down here. This is Bakhmut in this area. Avdiivka here is just above the Donetsk region. This is the Yug group working in this area, again working with their aviation artillery and in their case heavy flamethrower systems. The flamethrowers are the TOS-1 multiple launch systems which are capable of deploying thermobaric weapons, thermobaric warheads, the thermobaric ones being those which produce a large, like a fuel gas bomb explosion. These are apparently quite devastating against trench areas where there are men in trenches, as the gas explosion can reach down into the gullies of the trenches and into dugouts, and has quite a concussive effect, creates a vacuum of some sort, apparently devastating to be anywhere near. There is also reports that the newly updated fleet of Russian drones, I imagine these will be Lancet drones, are being equipped with small thermobaric warheads on them, so that they can now not only be targeted at pieces of artillery, which the current high explosive armor piercing warheads on these Lancets can do today, but now getting thermobaric warheads so that they can also be targeted directly into areas like area where you might want to have a larger force and perhaps be more targeting personnel rather than targeting equipment. In moving down from there, in the Donetsk region, that's where we were. The enemy losses reported in the areas around Minkovka, Krasnoye, Avdiivka, and Kleshevka, just down here, just south of Bakhmut. Now, Kleshevka has been in the news quite a bit as there has been very heavy fighting around this area. I've covered this a bit in the last couple of days. Again, there seems to have not been any successful Ukrainian advance or ability to hold Kleshevka. Some reports in the last week that they have been able to make it into edges of the town, advance to part of the township, but they've been pushed back out again. So the Ministry of Defense reports that the Ukrainian servicemen losses in this Donetsk area has been 370 Ukrainian servicemen, 2 tanks, 6 armoured fighting vehicles, 4 motor vehicles, 2 US manufactured M777 artillery systems, and a Polish manufactured Krab and a D20 howitzer. Now moving to the South Donetsk region. So we've got Donetsk city here, Avdiivka, which, as we've talked about before, is somewhat encircled and may in fact be being used by the Russians as another cauldron, a trap, if you will, a way to draw in Ukrainian forces where they have them surrounded and then be able to attrit them in that area. South Donetsk region here, it's the Vostok group of forces. They have foiled one attempt by Ukrainians to conduct combat reconnaissance near Pryutny. The Regina Ridge, where are we? Just in here. So this is the Veremki ledge here, Veremka. This is where this road and this river follows its way down here with a ledge on the left-hand side. I believe it's a raised area. The Ukrainians have slowly been working the way down here from Veremka through Neskuchny, Makarivka, Staromayorsk, and now into Urozhny, and reportedly the head of the DPR, Donetsk People's Republic, Denis Pushilin, has reported that the Ukrainian forces did reach and briefly entered Urozhny today. However, so coming down here, I'm guessing coming down in here from the northern areas, or perhaps from Staromayorsk this way across and in from the west, but they have been pushed out again. So at this stage, reportedly no Ukrainian forces remaining in Urozhny, although they did make it into the town today. The Ministry of Defense reporting is that there were up to 180 Ukrainian servicemen lost in this fighting. 1 tank, 3 armoured fighting vehicles, 2 pickup trucks, another Polish Krab self-propelled artillery system, 2 Giansint B guns, and an Akatsiya self-propelled howitzer. So again, seeing in here a lot of focus on Ukrainian artillery systems. And if this reporting is correct, as I say, it's Russian reporting, so take it with the amount of skepticism you think is required. But if it is correct, then these reports do indicate continued removal and destruction of Ukrainian artillery. Now, the Ministry of Defense of Russia does not provide details on their own losses. We don't get numbers from them on how many of their men, how much of their equipment is lost. For information like that, we've got to look at Telegram channels from Slavyangrad and military summary channel on YouTube, who actually take the time each day to locate the video footage which corroborates and is geolocated, and we're able to then get some idea of the Russian sometimes manpower losses, but more often on footage of equipment losses for the Russians. But if these Ministry of Defense numbers are at least close to accurate, we can see that this is sustained losses across the front line of lots of very expensive equipment for the Ukrainians. Now, moving, where are we to? To the Zaparosa region. So again, moving ourselves a little bit west over here. So this is we're just on the we're just to the east of the Novokharkovka reservoir area. This big lake area here is now quite dry because the dam downstream of it was destroyed a few months ago. But here, this is where the reporting is that 3 attacks by assault groups of the 46th Air Mobile Brigade have been repelled close to Robotino or Robotny, this area here. So this is often referred to as the Kharkiv region. Now this, if we just zoom out a little bit, the Zaparosa region, just to the east of the Novokharkovka reservoir area. This is what was considered to be the main planned route of attack in the June or the most recent Ukrainian offensive, and the idea was to drive down through Kharkiv, through Robotny, to capture Tokmak, and from Tokmak to then go down to Melitopol, and then from Melitopol down to the coast, and this way then be able to cut off Russian access to Crimea from this area, from this Zaparosa region. Now, obviously, that didn't happen. So we can see at this stage the Ukrainian offensive has made it as far as sort of the north of Robotny, is around here, and they're held up sort of higher, further north than that. This is the point they're reaching down into. So still, we'll just measure this here. Still, what have we got from Robotny to Tokmak? 20 kilometers, then from Tokmak to Melitopol, another 55 kilometers. So it's 75 kilometers from where they are now to Melitopol. And this is when they get to Tokmak. Tokmak is ringed in serious defense lines that have been developed by the Russians over quite some time. So the something needs to change for the Ukrainians for them to realistically be able to get to Tokmak, to get through the defences and get through Tokmak, and then get from Tokmak another 50 k's down to Melitopol, and then from Melitopol to the shore. I think it's a big ask. The reporting is that the enemy losses were up to 40 Ukrainian servicemen in the Zaparosa region, 3 armoured fighting vehicles, 4 motor vehicles, another Vodzika self-propelled artillery system, and a D-30 howitzer. So again, artillery pieces being picked off. And just an interesting piece of news on the that I picked up today here at the Zaparosa power plant, which is here on the reservoir area. Reports that the number 4 reactor is going to be moved into a cold shutdown mode as a leak was detected in some steam circuitry. It wasn't reported that it was dangerous. It may have just been in a, not in a radioactive area of steam, but enough that apparently it's going to put into cold shutdown, and that number 6 is being considered for hot shutdown. Now, this was off the back of a translated article, which I must admit the first part of it I could not quite decipher what it meant. It was talking about power being shut off to the plant, is what it seemed like, or perhaps it was power being shut off from the plant. I couldn't tell. So if I see more about this, I'll report. I'll report more on this, but also to do with the Zaparosa nuclear power plant today, reporting that inspections have been completed of the roofs of the reactors, and the allegations from Volodymyr Zelensky that there were mines on the roofs have been disproven, that people from the atomic energy service, the monitoring people who've been in there, have been able to access wherever they needed to in the plant, and there were no mines planted there, which, if we think about it, is actually quite frightening, because at the time, this was being said by Zelensky as being fact, that there were mines there and the Russians were planning to enact some sort of destructive activity on the nuclear power plant. Now, if that wasn't the case, then why was he saying that was the case? And we talked about what the likely reasons might have been when that happened, but quite frightening. Maybe we dodged a big bullet there. Okay, just moving down then to a little bit further to the southwest, down to the Hassan region. Now, Hassan region, now just yesterday, in this area, the Kazachi Lahiri, just this area here, this is where we had that, I thought, really quite powerful footage. It looked like something out of an action film, with 4 or 5 Ukrainian soldiers rapidly retreating off a pier, jumping into a boat at night time, under heavy machine gun fire, and getting the heck out of Dodge as quick as they could, all firing back at the shore, where clearly there were explosions, grenade type explosions going on. I imagine there were Russian forces approaching to kick them off the island. Anyhow, there hasn't been any real further reporting about that development. It appears as though the attempt that was made yesterday was thwarted, that there may have been some access into the township by the Ukrainians, and then they were pushed back. Once that was identified by the Russians, they were pushed back. Now, these island areas, as I mentioned yesterday, there seems to be Ukrainian control through some of these, and in particular today, reporting that through this area here, which is just to the west or slightly to the southwest of the Antonovsky Bridge. Now, this is Kherson city here. The Ukrainians have for some time now established a foothold just on this left bank or eastern bank of the Dnieper River at the Antonovsky Bridge. It's not been something that's been easy for them to hold. They've come under some serious bombing and missile attacks from the Russians, but they have managed to continue here, and it appears that they have got some foothold, and a growing foothold around this area, I think up to the Conca River, perhaps even now getting across the Conca River. So while they initially started here, and there was some work to try and move down this roadway, which would have made sense. It would make, if they could have controlled this, it would have been very easy to then move heavy equipment, tanks and that sort of thing across there, moving them through these regions. As you can see, everything is separated by water on at least 1 or 2 levels. I mean, the Conca River itself, I don't think is terribly wide. We might just zoom in and measure what it is across here. Yeah, look, it's only 100 meters across, but nevertheless, trying to get something heavy like a tank or fighting vehicles across that 100 meters is going to be a pain. You'll be exposed, it'll be visible, and you'll get picked off. It won't be a quick thing like a speedboat getting across. So, yes, the Ukrainians do seem to be making some ground in this area, but again, I think it's going to be a struggle for them to get large numbers of forces here and really then be able to mount any sort of an assault out of Kherson, to come back this way to try to get over here to aid in the cutting off of Crimea, which I assume is why they're trying to drive down that area would have been to support people coming down to Melitopol to come across this way and cut Russian activity from coming up through Crimea, perhaps. Anyhow, the Ministry of Defence is reporting that in the Kherson region, the enemy losses were up to 50 Ukrainian servicemen, 2 motor vehicles, 1 M777 artillery system, 1 Giansint B gun, 1 Vodzika self-propelled artillery system, as well as a D-30 howitzer. So again, here in the Kherson region, another 4 pieces of artillery reportedly destroyed. That, I think, is the battlefront summary for today. So if that's all you're here for, then that's it for today. What I might go on to now is maybe a little bit of some of the other activity which is going on, either related to Ukraine or geopolitically interesting at the moment. So obviously one of those is Niger, what's happened there after the coup on the 26th. Now, the military junta who overthrew the president of Niger, they have announced the formation of a new government today. And also today there have been reports of French incursion into the airspace of Niger, clashes between French forces and Niger National Guard forces. And allegedly, again, it's difficult to corroborate this, but the leaders of the new government stated that French special forces performed an operation to release from detention 16 terrorist leaders that had been jailed in June. So reportedly, French forces have broken them out of the prison in which they were in and released them. I'm just speculating here because I don't have enough information about what's really gone down. But clearly the French are not happy about what's happening in Niger. Their uranium supplies are threatened. Their gold supplies are threatened. They need that uranium for their nuclear power generation, particularly as they're starting to head towards winter. I don't know what the European and French oil, gas supplies are like, given the increased prices they've had, the war they've been fighting. So the French will not be mucking around, and they will be looking to find any way to cause chaos within Niger to destabilise the new government, and I would imagine ideally reinstate the previous one, who they are far more friendly with. Victoria Nuland, Deputy Secretary of State, visited Niger yesterday. Apparently she was not given a warm welcome. Apparently she tried to talk to Bazoum, the deposed president, and she was denied that. I think she was able to speak to some of his representatives on the phone, but no meeting. And her trip seemed to be quite quick and very blunt. I imagine she would have gone down there and said, "We're going to cause you a whole heap of pain if you don't get out of the office and put the other guy back." So the French allegedly getting in there, releasing some terrorist leaders, causing problems, completely possible. I mean, from the French position, why wouldn't you? You've got some forces there in the country, cause problem for the new government, get the populace to dislike them, see if they'll throw them out for you. I think this will be really interesting to see what happens, because France needs to respond here in some way. Now, ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West African States, who until a couple of days ago were looking like they were threatening military action against Niger if Niger didn't open up again its exports to France and the US of gold and uranium. Reports today are that they have declared now no intention to conduct a military operation in Niger. So interesting, wait and see. I mean, this could change at any stage here. Also, of course, we have our favourite PMC, the Wagner forces, down in Mali next door, reports that they have been invited into Niger and they've accepted and will support the new government against terrorist activity. I would suggest that they would consider French activity to be terrorist activity. So it will become very interesting if we have to start reporting on Yevgeny Prigozhin giving us updates on Wagner fighting French forces in Niger, which is possible. Anyhow, we'll keep an eye on that one. Tony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, he has tweeted today that the Belarus elections of 3 years ago were fraudulent and that the US is imposing sanctions and visa restrictions on Belarusian citizens. In retaliation to that, I've just read before starting this video that Belarus is apparently now denying information to the United States relating to the whereabouts details of Belarusian people who are living outside of Belarus. So I imagine here if they're living in America or if they're living in other countries and would like to travel to America or living in countries where America has strong agreement, like the UK perhaps, France, Germany, that if the US knew they were in those areas, they would effectively try to sanction them or stop them from traveling and obtaining visas. And so Belarus has now stopped providing that information to the US. Shoigu. So Sergei Shoigu, the Russian Minister for Defense, he has in a televised interview announced that Poland is planning to form a joint Polish-Ukrainian military unit, ostensibly for security, but with the ulterior motive of occupying Western Ukraine. Now, this is something which we've spoken about a couple of times. The theory here being that Poland offers to Ukraine to provide boots on the ground support, Polish personnel, Polish trainers, Polish equipment. It's not part of NATO. It would just be Poland on their own helping out. They go in. They may even say effectively they provide a peacekeeping role, a protective role around the western states, maybe going as far as Kiev and providing protective forces there, not frontline to try and stop the escalation, position themselves through the west. Very helpful. Thank you very much. Perhaps until if the Russian grinding advance continues and Ukraine reaches a point where maybe the US drop their funding, suddenly the Ukraine is depleted in strength and ability to do anything, and they now have a second occupying force, if you will, in their country, being the Poles in the west of Ukraine, who could then effectively say, well, there's nothing you can do about this, Ukraine. We're going to caretake this land for you until you get back on your feet. And then 25 years later, they put into legislation, we've been here for 25 years, it's ours now. Who knows how it would go down, but you can imagine that sort of thing could happen. What has Shoigu also said? Actually, what he's saying does back up what something that was announced by in July by Russian Foreign Intelligence Service Director Sergei Narishkin. He said at a meeting between President Vladimir Putin and the permanent members of the Security Council that Poland could seize control of the western territories of Ukraine. So Shoigu is continuing that story. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know. I'm not part of the CM. The Polish don't tell me what they're planning, but it certainly looks like an opportunity. I mean, if you're a nation, big powerful nation, you're talking about building the second biggest army in Europe. You don't like the Russians, you've got a weak neighbour in between that aren't going to do anything if you take that land. Maybe that land grab is good. Maybe it gets you kudos within NATO. It gets your border closer to Russia and gets your air defence systems closer. I don't know. Could happen. Wouldn't be surprised if we see something like that happening. Nothing against the Polish, but I just, as a geopolitical move, it kind of makes sense. If there's land there you want and it's right next to you and it used to be yours, you consider it to be yours, and that being the case only 75 years ago, if some of that land in Belarus and Western Ukraine was Polish up until 1944 or 45, then you might like to take it back. Sweden. Now, Sweden still not in NATO, and Turkey possibly ratifying this in October. Not sure if that's going to happen. Hungary pushing back now. It's interesting that Sweden's Psychological Defence Agency, which is part of the Ministry of Defence in Sweden, is blaming Russia. RT and Sputnik, their media outlets, for falsely claiming Swedish government supported the Quran burning, which has occurred there recently, by publishing a series of articles in Arabic. The two Iraqi men responsible for Monday's burning was Salwan Momika and Salwan Nahim, also burned a Quran outside Stockholm Mosque on the Muslim holiday of Eid al-Adha in June. The Swedish Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson, he has accused outsiders of exploiting the country's freedom of expression. Their freedom of expression laws. Now, reportedly, Sweden has very, how would you put them, strong freedom of expression laws, or loose hate crime laws. In Sweden, you're able to say what you want to say to some extent. It seems, I haven't delved into it in depth, but that at least is the surface reporting on this. And that the Swedes are believing that this freedom of speech that they allow is being used to draw them into international conflicts. Interesting. And speaking of Hungary, who's presently not yet ratified Sweden's accession to NATO, Budapest has just been hosting the Conservative Political Action Conference, the CPAC, for the second straight year, and it's being attended mostly by US and European conservatives. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban was a keynote speaker there, and he has reportedly lashed out against the virus of wokeism propagated by Western liberals, boasting that he had the antidote. And I'm not quite sure what that is. But this has prompted US Ambassador David Pressman to chide Prime Minister Viktor Orban, and basically saying that Orban's focus on wokeism is just focused on a fake culture war, and calling on Hungary to focus instead on the Russian conflict with Ukraine next door. All other things aside, like Orban calling out the Americans on their wokeism or their postmodernist culture, the challenges that they are seeing with that, they're drifting away from conservative values. I think good on him. Yeah, I think it gets up the Americans' nose, because the Americans can't really deny it. You watch any news of the States at the moment, and that whole Gnostic, Marxist, postmodernist, woke, if you like, culture is prevalent, and it's being driven, in America. Interestingly, on that topic, I read today that Disney Plus lost 11 million subscribers last month. That's a lot of subscribers in a month, I think, to lose. And the logic behind it is that they are missing the mark with the general population, who perhaps want their kids to watch cartoons and not have to deal with political ideology being in those cartoons. Perhaps wanting their kids to watch cartoons where the characters aren't overly sexualized one way or another. So who knows? It looks like, though, Disney is starting to cop some sort of a backlash against their very postmodernist programming. Anyhow, last thing. with Orban claiming he had the antidote to the virus of wokeism, he did also call for the return of Donald Trump to the White House. Yeah, which I think would be fun to see. I'm hoping Trump gets back in. It's not that I'm a Trump supporter, but in terms of interest and having things to report upon, having Trump back in the White House would be great fun from a reporting point, entertainment point. Okay, last thing for tonight, but again, some big news. Pakistan. So there are leaked documents that the US State Department has influenced politics in Pakistan. I'm just going to jump here to an article from The Intercept. It's publicly available, so I'm going to read a little bit from it. But the title is Secret Pakistan Cable Documents US Pressure to Remove Imran Khan. All will be forgiven, said a US diplomat, if the no confidence vote against Pakistan Prime Minister Imran Khan succeeds. So the US State Department encouraged the Pakistani government in a March 7th, 2022 meeting to remove Imran Khan as Prime Minister over his neutrality on the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So this is March, just after the invasion, according to a classified Pakistani government document obtained by The Intercept. The 1 month after the meeting held between the US officials and the leaked Pakistani government document, documented in the leaked Pakistani government document, a no confidence vote was held in Parliament, leading to Khan's removal from power. The vote is believed to have been organised with the backing of Pakistan's powerful military. Since that time, Khan and his supporters have been engaged in a struggle with the military and its civilian allies, who Khan claims engineered his removal from power at the request of the US. So Khan had claimed that. Now it appears documents have come out that confirm that. The text, I'll just read a little more here. The text of the Pakistani cable produced from the meeting by the ambassador and transmitted to Pakistan has not previously been published. The cable, known internally as a cipher, reveals both the carrots and the sticks that the State Department deployed in its push against Khan, promising warmer relations with the US if Khan was removed and isolation if he was not. So this is just a very interesting piece of reporting, what appears to be confirmation that, again, the Americans have influenced the politics of a nation other than their own. And this is at a time when we see the African nation perhaps moving towards Russia. If you've seen some of the imagery of the crowds around Niamey, the capital of Niger, and the riot or celebration crowds because of the new government there, a lot of Russian flags being shown there. Even I saw some reporting, which I believe was correct, of people printing Wagner logos, because Wagner flags aren't available for sale, so they've just been getting printers and printing out A4 pieces of paper, the Wagner logos. So it seems like the Russian support in Africa is very strong. In Pakistan, we can see American influence in the governments there, but not not reaching out and really making friendly partnerships with the government within these nations. It's an interesting time. Anyhow, the Pakistan one, I'm sure we'll hear more about that in the next little while. I am going to perhaps not be able to produce a show for a day or two. I've actually got a very brief holiday with the family. We're just going to the snow here where I live. It's winter time. We're going to have a day or two there. I'm not a good skier. I will be probably trying to put together a report from there, but I don't know how I'll go. So if I don't speak to you for a day or two, that'll be why, but I'll be back as soon as I can. Look, if you've made it this far, thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the show. If you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe, and I look forward to talking to you soon.